Hi, everyone. Let us know in the comments if you can see us and if you can hear us too.
We have a couple people already joining and chatting. So, hola Miguel Ángel, qué gusto de verte de nuevo. Hey guys, let's see who else is here. Quite a few. Can you tell us where you're calling from, please? Which country you're calling from?
Hi, Alexi, Homan too. Hi.
Hey Robin, how are you? Nice seeing you again. All right. Couple from Ukraine, good. US, India, nice. Slate for him. Toronto, hey. Oh, Elias, I've seen you before. Nice to see you again. Salvador, Espanol. Indian, all right. So we got quite a few crowd today, which is good.
Yeah, let's wait for a few more minutes. I think people are still joining us.
Canada, Vancouver, I've been there. Ukraine, oh yes. India. Venezuela, hola Marta. Kiev, Ukraine. Republic of California. France, bonjour. Bonjour, Joseph.
Yay, so many people from Ukraine.
Spain, yes, there's quite a few. Nice, nice, beautiful. Love that. Okay, we're gonna start whenever you're ready, Teresa, I think.
Yeah, I think let's wait for one more minute. 6:05.
Sorry, but I'm excited about this topic, so I can't hold my breath much longer. Okay, while we wait, what we're gonna do today, once we get started, and in just a few couple minutes, it's actually something interesting. It's a topic that it's a passion of me. It's the order of execution, and we're gonna take about an hour or so to go over one single page of the documentation in Salesforce. It's one page, it's 20 points, but it's very, very, very important, and it's not very well covered. So that's why I try to do this session. I've done this session a few times before, and each time I have to change a couple of things. And this time we'll do it for the Winter 23 release version.
Awesome. Yeah, okay, guys, let's start. Thank you for a small introduction, pre-introduction, and I'm gonna make a small introduction. So thank you, first of all, for joining us, for joining today's class on order of execution, as you already know. My name is Teresa. I'm from Noltic. We're a Salesforce consulting partner, but we are also an ISV partner, which means we don't just implement Salesforce solutions, but we also create our own products. And you can find them on Noltic's App Exchange profile. So today's class is a part of the webinar series that we created in collaboration with Trailhead Academy mentors, with Andres and some other mentors to support Ukrainian developers during the time of the Russian war by sharing knowledge with them and keep growing Ukrainian expertise in Salesforce. Even so, we are very happy to see Ukrainian developers today here, but we're also very happy to see people from other countries. It's quite an international audience and quite a few of you. So happy for joining everyone. Today's speaker is Andres Perez. He's already doing his class with us for, I believe, fourth or fifth time. Thank you for that, Andres, for being active and for supporting Ukrainians. Andres has over 30 years in tech. He's very well experienced, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy the class today. In the end of the class, you will have a Q&A session, so please be active, ask questions, and take the most you can get from the webinar today.
Excellent. Thanks, Teresa.
Thank you.
As Teresa just pointed out, please do write your questions. It's a little bit of a delay on the messages that when you write them in LinkedIn or when I get them. So if you write them throughout the session, I'll get to them. Also, you can reach me on LinkedIn and ask me any additional questions that you may have as well. So thank you so much, Teresa, for that quick introduction. And it's a pleasure and an honor for me to be able to help in any way that I can in these very, very difficult times that you guys are going through. So this is part of that series of webinars, as you were saying, that trying to help in a little bit as much as I can from thousands of miles away. So this topic, thanks, Teresa. So this topic, it's talking about that single page on the documentation, which is one line of one single page with 20 points, but we're going to take about an hour to go in a lot of details about that. And it's something that keeps changing. Salesforce keeps updating that page. This is, I believe, the third time I've done this order of execution webinar. There was one small thing that changed from summer to winter. Some of the icons changed the order, which is kind of interesting. So I need to keep updating it, and Noltic gave me the opportunity to share this with them and with everybody else. So with that, let's get started. My screen froze. All right. Forward-looking statements. If you have seen any presentation by Salesforce in the past, this basically is a reminder not to make any purchase decisions based on how Salesforce will be, but how it is today. Most of you already hopefully know me. If not, please make sure that you do follow me on LinkedIn. I go by my nickname, ElToroIT. I work for Salesforce. I'm a senior manager and solution architect lead. I am based in Canada, in Toronto, like a couple of you I saw on the introductions. And this is the first time I worked with Salesforce was on winter 09. So that's that little cup of chocolate. That was the logo back then. I think that in summer it's Einstein skiing, and in winter it's a guy with his skis. I don't know his name. Salesforce certified instructor, all that beautiful stuff. So what we're going to do today is talk about few different aspects. The first one is the order of execution. Then we'll talk about field updates, because it adds a very level of complexity to this order of execution. A very important and related topic, which is the Apex transactions. We'll talk about governor limits, and then I'll try to answer the questions that come through LinkedIn. So start posting them if you need to, the questions that you have. So let's begin with the order of execution. And this order of execution is a series of steps that gets performed when a record is being saved. Saving means either insert, update, or upsert. The number of steps and the order of those steps change between releases. Right now, Summer 23 has 20 steps, but as I mentioned, oh, sorry, this I should say Winter 23. Uh, Summer 23 is a year from now. Winter 23 has 20 steps, and as I mentioned, of a couple of them flip places. Um, I will be representing those steps through what I call the bracelet. Um, I think this bracelet helps you remember the order of steps. And it's important to keep them in the back of your mind and be aware of these guys, because it is the source of most issues for those of you working with a Salesforce core, either developers, app builders, and administrators. And it's such as an important topic that is covered in multiple Salesforce certification exams. So hopefully this bracelet will help you remember those steps. And one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to flatten this bracelet into a straight line and cover each of the icons in that particular bracelet. I just put it unfolded on the bottom of the screen, so it's easier to know where we are when we go and talk about these different steps. So the first thing that it happens is that it will initialize the record. So if you are inserting a record, it creates a brand new record. If you're updating, it goes back to the database and brings the current record that you are updating. This allows you to have the original record, especially when you're doing an update, on the trigger.old if you're using Apex, or functions like prior value and isChange if you're working declaratively with validation rules or flows or whatnot. The next thing that happens, step number 2, is that it's going to load the data into a copy of that particular record. So if we were doing an update, it loads the data, then it makes a copy and puts the new values into that particular copy. Then, as I say, it loads the new values from the request, overriding obviously the old values, and that's why we get the trigger that new, or declaratively the new field values. If the request came from the UI, either the app builder or a page layout, then there's going to be some system validation rules that are going to be executed at this particular point. Compliance with layout specific rules. So if you make the field required, if you make the field read only on the page layout, then those it's going to be evaluated right here. Also, that you have the valid field formats and the maximal field length and stuff. So if you're doing a date, you cannot choose month 13, of course, because that will be invalid. And that's a system validation rule that is being run right here. If it is not coming from the UI, not from a page layout, not from a builder, so it's coming from data loader, let's say, for example, then the only thing that it validates is that the foreign keys will not reference to itself. So if the account has a lookup that is called the parent account, that it doesn't talk to itself, because then it will, of course, it will be a loop. When you are creating multi-line items, and those are those for the quotes or the opportunity line items, then there's additional validation rules that are run at this particular point. The custom validations for those multi-line items are run at this moment. Then it comes the before flows. We're going to talk about flows quite a bit. Because flows, it's something that is going to be very, very relevant as we continue working with our Salesforce, especially because they are deprecating workflows and processes, and sometimes they already start deprecating. So in Winter 23, for example, you cannot create new workflows. You can still update the ones that you have, but you cannot create new ones. So things start happening where those workflows and processes are being deprecated. And as you will see throughout this session today, flows is a blessing because it will make, if you change everything for flows and get rid of workflows and processes, um, your order of execution will actually be much, much simpler. We'll talk about that once we go through the entire bracelet. We'll talk about how flows will be really very, very helpful. Now, and I'm talking about these flows. Obviously, I'm not talking about the screen-based flows. I'm talking about the record trigger flows. And record trigger flows, there's two types of record trigger flows that you can create. What I call the French fries, which is French fries FF for fast field updates. So kind of a little mnemonic. So the French fries are what used to be called before save flows, which are now officially the real term for that is fast field updates. I just call them French fries. So you're going to run all your French fries at this particular point. Now, French fries are very limited on what they can do. They can only basically update the fields that you're, for the record that you're inserting or updating, which makes things very, very cool and makes things very simple. All right. Then, after you've run your French fries flows, you run your before triggers, Apex triggers. It executes all your before triggers, all the before insert if you're inserting, or all before update if you are updating, obviously. But remember, you should not have multiple triggers on the same object, same event. Unlike flows, the order is not deterministic. So if you have three triggers, A, B, and C, they could run CBA, CAB, ABC. Well, it could be in any order. It's totally, let's say, random. Not really random, but not deterministic. Flows, on the other hand, you can specify which order you want those flows to work. Okay. So don't have more than one Apex trigger for the same object, same event. Don't have more than one before update account trigger. Try to avoid them. Then step number 5 is about validation. Here, remember that the French fries flows and the before triggers, their whole purpose of them is so that if the user didn't complete a field properly, you could change the value to something more appropriately to whatever type of logic you have. And that's basically what the French fries or the before triggers are all about. So once you have changed the record, it makes sense to actually do a validation. So we're going to run the system validations again, except for the layout specific rules. And we are also going to run the user-defined invalidation rules. I like to call them invalidation rules because you're going to write a formula. If that formula is true, the data is invalid. So you're checking to see if the user wrote invalid data. You're not checking to see if the user wrote valid data. So if you are building a site that it's for people over, retired people over 65, then the age is greater than 65. That would make the data valid, but we're checking for invalid data. So we have to write a formula that says if the age is less than 65. I'm assuming 65 is the retirement age. It is here in North America, but it may change throughout the world, obviously. But that's the idea. You're going to write a formula that if it is true, you don't want the record to be saved. So you're basically checking for invalidations. So I call these guys the invalidation rules. As you can see, I like changing the names, things that makes a little bit more easy to remember. Next thing, step 6, is about checking for duplicates, where it's going to execute your duplicate rules. Duplicate rules, something that you have matching rules. If the records match, then it is duplicate. And you could either allow with a warning, or you could actually block the record from being saved. If the record is being blocked, of course, nothing else will happen, and the user gets an error and everything stops right here. But if the if there's no duplicates, or just saying warnings rather than errors, or allowed rather than blocking, then it's going to move to the next step, which is number 7, where you're going to do a save. In this save, you're going to save the record to a database. Note, very important, saving is not the same as committing. Saving, I like to think about saving as writing the record with pencil. You can easily erase it and put something else in there. But when you commit, then you save the record with pen, with ink. You cannot really erase that ink mark as easy as it was pencil, of course. So the saving happens multiple times, but there's only going to be one and only one commit. And we'll talk about that as we move a little bit later. Now, when you save the record, Salesforce will assign some values to some specific fields, including the ID, created date, created by ID, last modified date, last modified by, system mode stamp, opportunities won, cases closed, and some other fields that get automatically calculated and saved rather than formula fields, because formula fields never get saved. And notice that, for example, your before triggers didn't have access to the ID of the record that was being inserted because it had not been assigned before this particular point. So there are some things that are very, very important to understand, that this order of execution actually helps you wrap your head around. The next step is step number 8, where we're going to work with after triggers. It executes all the after triggers. If you're inserting all the after insert triggers, if you're updating all the after update triggers on that particular object, obviously. But again, remember that you should not have multiple triggers on the same object and the same event. Because unlike flows, the order is not deterministic. You do not know which of those triggers will run first, second, and third. Unlike flows. In flows, you can actually determine in which order you want them to run. Before triggers in Apex are intended to modify the record, just like the French fries flows. The before triggers are intended to make changes to the records that are coming in. The after are intended to create other records. And when you create other records, then the entire bracelet that we're going through will be executed for that other record. And then it comes back after that other bracelet is completed, and it will continue with the next step. With one very important difference, which I will keep repeating many times throughout the presentation, is that in that second bracelet, the commit will not happen. There's not going to be a commit. There's not going to be a post commit, because there's only one and only one commit that will happen in your entire Apex transaction. We'll define a little bit better that term in a few minutes. Then we have the assignments. An assignment is basically for leads and cases, where you assign the owner of your case or lead to a particular user or queue. So it sets the owner either to a user or a queue for cases and leads based on custom rules. Those assignment rules are run right here. After the assignment, then we do the auto responses. Auto responses are things that you configure for cases and leads where it will send an email in response to a record being inserted or updated if it's the customer who is actually creating that case or creating that lead. So in a web to lead, where a customer is filling out a form, clicks a button, a lead gets created in Salesforce, then there's an email that's going to be sent. If we have a community and the users creating lead cases or leads, maybe, most likely for communities will be AI. Sorry, not communities, digital experiences, which has been renamed. The user will be creating their own cases, then a auto response will be sent. But if it is a user inside Salesforce who are creating those cases or leads, then there's not going to be an auto response. All right, then remember that the emails are actually not really being sent here. The emails are just being scheduled. The emails will be sent as one of the post-commit operations after the commit happens. And remember, there's only one commit. Then we start getting to those crazy things that mess everything up in the order of execution called the workflows. One of the few things that mess everything up. So far, it's very linear and very easy to understand, very simple to understand. You just have to understand there's some steps and that's it. But workflows are one of the things that start messing up with the order of execution. And it's actually some of the causes of issues where when I started working for a Salesforce back in 2009, I was in the developer support team. Now I'm an instructor. And I remember it was very common to have a case from a customer. I'm sure you guys have had this problem as well. That one morning your org is broken and your code doesn't work anymore. It worked yesterday, doesn't work today, but nobody touched the code. And that was a very common case that I got. And after looking into the setup audit trail, I would definitely see that nobody had touched the code, but they had added a workflow, especially with a field update, which we're going to talk about in just a little bit. So workflows are those things that really start messing up things. So the workflows are configurations for running some logic that that will either send an email, send what is called an outbound message, a SOAP web service call out to an external service, or create a record, which is a task record, or a field update. But for simplicity, we're going to talk about the field update on the next step. And this is where the field updates will happen. If the workflow field update makes a change to a different value of the record that is being inserted or updated, because you can say workflow field, say, okay, assign this value a 3. If you already had a 3, well, nothing happens. But if it is a different value and it changes, so you had a 5, now you're making it a 3, the value does change, then in this case, the record gets updated, of course, but then there's some part of the order of execution that gets executed, including your before triggers, So if the workflow make a change, then we have the before update triggers. Even if you're doing an insert, it's not the before insert trigger that's going to run again, because now you're making a change to it. Basically, you're doing an update. So you're going to run your before update triggers. It's going to do system validations. It's not going to do custom or declarative automations. Your own invalidation rules are not going to run here. It will not execute before update flows, custom validation rules, duplicate rules, processes, escalation rules, none of that stuff. But what it will do is going to save the record, and then it's going to run your after update triggers. So that's a subset, a small subset of the order of execution before triggers, system validations, not custom validations, saves the record, and it does a after triggers. It will then continue with where it was before, doing the escalation rules. Now, escalation rules are, again, things that you configure through the setup menu that allows you to assign a case to a person or a queue and notifies that a case needs attention. So it's very good for managing your SLAs. So service level agreement. So if the case is getting older and like a day old and nobody's looking at your case, and you guarantee that to your customers that you will take a look at all your cases within a day, then that's what the escalation is. It's for. One of the things that escalations can do. Then we talk about processes. Processes are those elements that you build with the process builder, of course. It executes your processes. Those processes have a very large, much larger than the workflows, set of actions that it can take, including calling flows. So those flows will be executed. Also, there was a pilot, or there is a pilot in summer 21 that allows you to execute flows from our workflows. If this never, I don't remember what happened with this pilot, but if it is still a pilot, most likely pilot's not gonna succeed because we are retiring processes and workflows anyways. The order of your processes is not guaranteed. And if they do make changes to the records, then a few more steps of the order of execution is actually executed right here, including before triggers, validations, duplicates, save the record after triggers. So a lot more things happen, which, as I will explain later, could be very it's error prone, so it could lead to other type of errors, as we'll talk about that later. So most of the safe order of is executed. And if the process creates other records, so let's say you're updating an account and you create a contact, then all the bracelet will happen, except there's no commit, because only one commit happens for the entire Apex transaction. Once the process is done, we're going to run the afterflows. What used to be called after save flows, what they're now called the actions and related records are. So those are your parrot flows. You have your French fries, fast fill updates before, and your parrots, which are your actions and related records. One of the ideas of your parrot flows is to create other records. So if you are inserting an account, you can create a contact. Well, in that case, the entire bracelet will happen for the contact, except that, of course, there's not going to be a commit. I forgot to put this on the slides, but if you're updating the same field, the same record that is being inserted, then the before triggers, Apex triggers, your custom validation rules, and the after triggers will run. Before update triggers, validations, custom validations, and your after Apex triggers. But typically, you want to do the field updates on the French fries, not on the parrots. All right, then we have entitlements, which allows you to build your entitlement rules. This is another tool that helps you with the SLAs for work orders. All right. Then we're going to execute the order of execution on your parent records. When would you update the parents? If the parent record contains a roll-up summary field that needs to be changed because of the current record that is being inserted, let's say you have a roll-up summary field that you count how many details you have, you create a new detail, well, that's going to update your parent. Or you have a cross-object workflow field update that make changes to the master record. So from the detail, you can also change the master. Then in that case, you're going to run the entire order of execution for your parent.
Here's what I found.
With one special difference, of course, is that the commit will not happen. Now, let's suppose that your rollout summary fields is now counting how many children have a specific condition. So, and then you summarize that on your grandparent. So then your grandparent rules run here. It updates the grandparent. If the grandparent record contains a roll-up summary field that needs to be changed because the parent record changed, or again, you have a cross-object workflow on the parent that changed the grandparent, then you're working on this order of execution bracelet. You are going to call the parent, and the parent is going to call the grandparent, with obviously one very important distinction is that the commits do not happen here. Because again, there's only one single commit for the entire Apex transaction. Finally, number 18, well, not finally, number 18, we have the criteria-based sharing, which basically, if you specify some rules that you want to share this record with some of the users, then it is going to create records or upsert those records on the account share table, contact share, case share, or any custom object underscore share table. Those tables will be updated or upserted, depending on the situation. But there's no triggers, there's no flows, there's nothing in those objects. So this will not mess up the order of execution or make it any more complex than it already is. Because we don't have any triggers, flows, or any other artifact that execute when those records get created or updated. Step 19, it's the commit. If this is the end of the transaction, and we'll take a look at that in 1 minute, then you will do a commit, where you commit all the DML operations, all the insert, updates, deletes that happened throughout the order of execution. They're going to be committed right here. But only if this is the end of the transaction, because it may not be. And then we have the post-commit, where it executes all the post-commit logic, including sending emails, executing asynchronous Apex like add future queuable, sending the outbound messages, sending the emails, all this stuff that happens at the post commit, only if this is the end of the transaction, which may not be, as I'll show you in the second segment of this webinar. So a little picture for you, because a picture is worth 1,000 words. This is the order of execution that we just took a look at as a bracelet. Hopefully it will help you remember those steps, visualize it, print it and put it on the wall. It helps quite a bit. All right, now let's talk about something that was a little bit complex and we kind of went a little bit superficial, but let's go into a little bit more details, which is the field updates. So as I was mentioning before, one of the problems that happened when I was working in support is that somebody changed something declaratively and your code break because your triggers are firing multiple times. So why can a before update trigger fire? Well, obviously, a before update trigger Apex trigger will fire because you are updating a record. Obviously. But they can also fire if you're inserting a record. Wait, what? You're inserting and the update fires? Yes. If you have any type of declarative field updates like workflow field updates, process, even if you're inserting, your update triggers will fire. Then the next question is, okay, how many times can it fire? Actually, that's a hard question to answer. For playing around, I've been able to make the same update trigger fire within one single transaction 100 times. And I just gave up after 100. I was trying to see if I could get 100 times, and I did. Because if I had one single SQL query in that trigger and I ran it 100 times, then I'm going to hit one of the governor limits. I was trying to prove that. So be very careful with recursive save, especially with recursive saves, because that's the way you're going to get to 100 times. So what's a recursive save? Well, when you are working with a process, there is a checkbox that you can tick that says that allow process to evaluate a record multiple times in a single save operation. That would allow you to increase the number of before update triggers that you're going to run. Also, sorry for the box. That box should have a little bit lower than this. You're going to reevaluate. You check the box that says reevaluate workflow rules after the field change, which is obviously a little bit below that red box. That also happens that also makes the before and after update Apex triggers to fire again. All right, so let's take a look at what happens when you do a field update. So if you have a transaction and it's going through, and you have a field update, it's gonna find all the workflows which can be fired because the conditions are met and because the workflow has not been executed in this transaction. You cannot repeat the same workflow. You cannot execute the same workflow multiple times, but you can have multiple workflows. And if a workflow increase a number, which is what I did to get to 100 triggers, then the next workflow is going to become valid and that's going to be executed. So find all the workflows which can be fired, which means the ones that meet the criteria, and the ones where the workflow has not been executed. And you execute all of them. Once you do that, then you're going to execute your triggers, before triggers, system validations, not custom, not duplicate checks. Then you're going to save your record, and then you're going to do the after triggers. Then you're going to find one process which can be fired. Not all, but one, which means one that meets the criteria and one that has not been executed. And you're going to execute that single process, one, not all, one. And then you execute the partial safe order of execution, including your before triggers and your after triggers. And you repeat that until you find no more processes to be found, to be executed. So you do all the workflows and then you do one trigger. But because you do one process, then you do each triggers for each process, not for all the workflows, but for each process, which means that that you execute triggers quite a bit. Then you go back to step number 4 and you find all the workflows which can be fired, execute all of them, do your triggers, find one process, and then for each process you run your triggers. So this is going to make your code really, really, really complex. So before the existence of flows, I would recommend that you do your field updates on the workflows, not on the processes, because the triggers are going to run way too many times. Now that we have flows, I recommend that your field updates, you do them on your French fries flows. Now you will go back in this loop up to 5 times. If you go a 6th time, then Salesforce is going to say, "I'm sorry, I'm giving up. I'm just going to continue." It doesn't fail. I'm just going to continue and finish whatever you have and be happy with that. Or they're going to keep me all day here, and I cannot do that. But then we have the beautiful record trigger flows, which makes your life much, much easier. Remember, multiple French fries or parrot record trigger flows, but you control their order. Not like in Apex that you didn't know the order or you can't control because it's not deterministic. Also, because French fries happens at the beginning of the entire bracelet, it happens before your assignments, auto responses, and all escalation, all that stuff. So it doesn't have to do that when you change a field because it will eventually do it anyways. So there's no additional complexities that get added on top of the flows. Also, in addition to that, your parrot flows, they could create, or the idea is for third records. So if you're creating an account, create a contact. So when you're creating a different object or updating a different object for that matter, then the entire ring is going to run. Except that, of course, the commit does not happen here because it only happens once at the end of the Apex transaction. When you're doing a DML on the same records with a parrot, which is not ideal, I recommend that you use the French fries for that. Then you're going to execute your before update triggers, system and custom validations, saves the record, and it performs the after update triggers. All right, so I have a repo, GitHub El Toro IT. Should be one of the recent repos because I just made a change this morning. Order of execution is a public repo where I have 4 different demos for you. One of the demos is trigger old values because I discovered that when you run a trigger a second time, like for example, when you're inserting a record, but the update triggers fire, the trigger at old will not contain the value that was on the database. It will contain the current value before you make any changes that has happened, which includes the changes done by the workflow field updates or the processes field updates. There is an order of execution example where you can see all the bracelet. And I did it on the case records because the case records, as we mentioned, have like escalations and entitlements and all this stuff. So it's more complex. When you're doing a custom object, you don't have escalations, you don't have assignment rules, you don't have all that stuff. So those steps are skipped. So I built that demo with the case record. I have another demo, which is the order of execution, but with a custom object. In this one, what I did was I think this is the one that I don't know if I saved that version, but this is the version of the demo that I got 100 SQL queries running. And then I did one on flows to see what will happen. And this is when I realized again, I guess, that flows is actually so much easier with regards to the order of execution. So those demos are there available for you. You just need to create a scratch org and run it or deploy it to a sandbox or whatever you want, because the metadata is already here in this project. So please feel free. What I do want to do is actually run one of them, which is the order of execution. So this is trigger.olds, which if you open it with the developer console, then you're gonna see the values of trigger.old is actually changing each time you invoke your triggers, because it's not, as some places say incorrectly, the original version of the record when your entire Apex transaction started. This is the version of the record when your triggers started. Cases, you can create a case and see all the order of execution. Order of executions. Let's do this one. Let's create a new record and save it. It's going to take a while, of course, because it's doing all the work. And this is recursively going through all the workflows, and it's going to get like 100 SQL queries exception. I'm not sure if I actually saved that version, but there's going to be a lot of triggers being executed. I think this version is the one where I do like 86. I executed my update trigger 86 times in one single save. And of course, if I had two SQL queries, in each of those, in that trigger, it would have run 160. What is that? 86 plus 86, 172 times, which of course the maximum is 150, right? So so you can see from this execution, you can see that it actually repeats 5 times, like I show in the slides. Repeats 1, repeats 2, repeats 3, repeats 4, repeats 5, and then it says, you know, I'm not going to repeat 6 times. You're going something crazy. I'm just going to follow up and continue and save the value, but updating your trigger 100, updating your trigger or running your trigger 86 times, which of course, again, if you had two SQL queries, then you would have failed by now. Actually, the limit is for SQL queries is 100. No, 150 is for DMLs. But anyways, you would have done 172, which is way over your limit, and you're done. So be very, very, very careful with recursions. So I'll give you this. It's available to you on this repo. You can just create a scratch org, and you can just create a scratch org. Let me know if you have any issues creating that. And basically that's it. I wish I had the time to go over each of the demos by its own, but I'm gonna leave that as homework. Homework that of course I'm not collecting, obviously, but I'll let you play with that on your own time. Another concept we need to talk about, which is somehow related with the order of execution, is the term an apex transaction. So what's an apex transaction? Actually, it's something that is a little bit hard to define, but I think the best I have been able to do, an apex transaction is a single unit of work that is executed whenever the service is hit. Single unit of work, which means you will not have half a transaction or 1.5 transactions. You will always have one. One that is going to be very, very long, as you saw it repeated 86 times or whatever the number was, or very short in case it crashed way too soon, but it's one transaction. It could terminate prematurely, but again, it's always one. Why can it terminate prematurely? Exceptions, governor limits, unhandled exceptions, I should have said, or governor limits. If you put that in try catch, well, of course you can handle. It's going to continue. But if you don't have a try catch, then it's going to break your apex transaction is going to terminate early. Okay, so it's a single unit of work. Everything that will happen when the server is hit. Now, what does it mean, the server being hit? Well, it uses this, if the user saves a record on the page layout, the user is going through the account object and clicks edit and type some information and click save, we're going to request the server to process that. So that's hitting the server. But also, if you are doing a data loader and you got some records, up to 200 records, because of course you cannot do more than 200 records at DML. It may seem like it, but that's a different story maybe for a different webinar. But it's going to send all those 200 records, either SOAP, REST, bulk, whatever it is, but 200 records. It's going to make one call saying, please insert these 200 records. Okay. If you go through Execute Anonymous and you run that, Execute Anonymous, you are requesting the server, please run this code. So that's again one, the server being hit. Whenever you're making a request to a server. Again, you can also do asynchronous apex, future, queuable, batchable, schedulable, all that stuff, which it's okay, Mr. Server, please do this. It could be a long, could be a short, but it's going to be one. And there are several ways in which a transaction can start. And why is this important? Because the commit, as I'll show you in the next slide, happens at the end of the transaction. So let's suppose, just for simplicity, that we're going to do Execute Anonymous. We're going to run a piece of code that has 5 lines of code. Now we're going to execute that code in Execute Anonymous. It could be an Apex web service. It could be a future method, but it's going to be its own transaction. Only those 5 lines is going to be a transaction. So there's no user on the page layout clicking buttons. It's just, this is the entire code in a future method or Execute Anonymous, or if you have this exposed as a web service. In either way, that's your entire thing that you're going to do. That's what you're asking the server to do. So when the server gets hit. So let's walk this line by line and see what's going on here. So the first thing that it's going to do, it's in memory, is going to create an account whose name is Acme. Line number 2, we're going to insert an account. We perform a DML. And in that case, we're going to do the order of execution, bracelet, except, guess what? There's no commit. Because there's only one commit at the end of the entire transaction. Then we create a contact, which is related to that particular that particular account in memory. And then we do a DML. And then it's going to execute the bracelet, except what? Guess what? It's not going to commit because there's only one commit and we are not done with the transaction. Do a system.debug, okay? And that's the end of the transaction. So now we do a commit and we do a post commit actions. Only once on the entire transaction. That's why it's so important. And if you were, for example, create an account, insert the create the account, insert the account, create the contact, insert the contact, and this record fails, and this after trigger fails over here, then everything gets rolled back and nothing gets committed because it didn't get to the commit, and much less to the post commit operations. All right. So why is this topic so important? Hopefully by now you have an idea of the complexity and the importance of this. But in addition to, just to like wrap it up, for app builders, you can break Apex code with clicks. If you have a complex transaction and you're using a developer, an Apex developer didn't wrote the code properly, we'll talk about that in the next webinar. But the developer didn't write the code properly, and you're using 80% of your governor limits, and then a app builder goes in there and creates a field update, and your triggers refire. Now you're doing 160% of your governor limits, and of course, it's going to blow up. Also, which tool are you going to use? Let's suppose that you want to change the owner of a field. You have multiple ways of doing that. You have an assignment rule, we have a workflow, we have a process, we have a flow, and which of those should you change the value? And if you change it in all of them to different values, which one is it the one that is going to actually be saved on the database? And that's easily answered if you think about that bracelet. If you do it on the after flows, well, that is the last thing, the last save. If you do it on the processes rather than the workflows or the assignment rules. So if you have it on the assignment rules and you also have a workflow with a field update that changed the user, that's the one that is going to save. But if you have a process, well, that's the one that is going to save. And if you have a afterflow, a parrot with a saving of the same record, well, that's the one that's going to save. So choose your tools accordingly and understand that if sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, it's maybe because of the order of execution. Sometimes let's say you're running on the workflow, and sometimes your process is run depending on some additional conditions, and sometimes the owner is properly assigned, sometimes it's not. Well, now you know why. As a developer, this is important to know because, of course, governor limits which apply to the entire transaction, not just to a DML, not just to a method, not just to a trigger, not just to a bracelet. The governor limits apply to the entire Apex transaction, and that Apex transaction could be very, very long. You saw in a picture how having multiple DMLs actually have multiple bracelets, and each of those could be very complex with a lot of complexity on your triggers and whatnot. So be extremely careful with that. And that brings me to the end of the session. I'm gonna go and take a look and see if there's any questions that have been asked. Let's see, how can I go through these quickly? First of all, you were saying hello, which country you're calling from. I'm looking for long paragraphs. Okay, here's one. As per Apex governor limits, total stack depth for any Apex invocation that recursively fires triggers. As per Apex governor limits, total stack depth for any Apex invocation that recursively fires triggers to insert. 16. Oh, that was not a question. That was a statement, I think. And actually, that is true. And Adesh, okay, now I see your question. You're saying Apex governor limits the total stack depth. So if on the trigger itself you have an update, and the trigger calls the trigger, and the trigger calls the trigger, and the calls, there is a stack depth of 16. You cannot go farther than that. But that's not what I was doing. What I was doing was with a workflow field update and a process field update, which refired the triggers. So the stack depth in each of those occurrences will be of 1. It will not be 16. It will just be 1. What happens with a bracelet if you would try to do DML on more than 200 records? All right, that's a good question, Ivan. That doing more than 200 records, it's not possible unless you do them from inside Apex. So if you do it from data loader or APIs, you are going to have a strict limit that says I will not take more than 200 records. You try to put 300, they will give you an error. So how can data loader import 1,000 records? Because it runs 5 times. If you have a lot of data and you want to do that import, you can do a bulk API. And the bulk API will take chunks of 200 records. But if you have a code in Execute Anonymous, says list of accounts, and then you do a loop where you insert 300 records, then when the triggers are running, the trigger is going to run with 200 records, and then immediately after, it's going to run with 100 records. Without going into everything else. Just when you're running your triggers may run multiple times. And then move to a next step on the order of execution. Amit, what is your take on multiple flows for an object, or would you say that it's better to have one long flow for? No. Good question, Amit. When you're working with Apex triggers, you should only have one trigger and control the logic of your triggers, of your methods that get called from in the trigger handlers from Apex. But the problem is if you have multiple triggers, they will you don't have control over the order in which they execute, and that's the problem. If Salesforce had given us a way to indicate the order in which they executed, then we would be fine. But with the flows, they did. So my take is I prefer that you guys work with separate flows, order them in the order that you want to order them, rather than having a humongous flow. I've seen recently, I don't know if it was a LinkedIn or a Twitter or one of those social media, the picture of the flow, and it was so small I could not even read it, and it has so much packed into it that it was really, really hard to troubleshoot. So that is like if you were a developer creating a method that does everything, and it's like 3,000 lines of code, which of course you never want to do that. You want to break that in small methods. So to answer my question, or to answer your question, it's use a lot of little flows and synchronize them or order them in whichever order you want them to be executed. When does the Apex transaction start, at the beginning or after the trigger step? Documentation says that the Apex transaction starts at the first line of code executed in the Apex transaction. If you're running from Execute Anonymous, the first line of code is gonna be the Execute Anonymous. Again, if you have web service, if you have features, your transaction is going to start with the very first line of Apex code where you're going to create a record and then insert it. When you're going as a response for a page layout and you click on the save button, the based on the book, the definition of the book says that, or documentation or whatever, says that it will start on the first line of Apex, which could be on an after trigger if you don't have a before trigger. So technically, your save and your validations and all the stuff that happened before, it will not be part of that. That's what the book says. All trigger chunks share the same limits. Dimitri, I'm not quite sure what you meant in that question. What tool to choose to build new logic? Before flow, before trigger to update the fields on the same record, after flow, after trigger to create updated related records in the org that has logic in both places. It really depends how. Okay, Salesforce recommends that everything should be done with, as much as possible, everything should be done with clicks rather than with code. When you do a code, well, it's much more complex. You need a programmer with more experience, more knowledge, rather than an app builder who's able to click it through. It's easier to maintain if you do with clicks rather than if you do with code. That's what Salesforce says. But in my opinion, me being a hard code developer, sometimes for me it's a little bit easier to do something that is complex with flows. Like for example, if I want a field to be required, I will never make a trigger for that. I would just click a checkbox on the field saying it is required. But if the logic is going to be more complex than that, if I just want one field to have one specific value whenever it runs, maybe I'll do it before trigger. If I need 20 fields with some additional logic, and sometimes it's 20, sometimes it's 10, sometimes it's 5, depending on conditions and stuff, and looking into other records, I will move into code. But if it is just one field that is going to be updated, I will do a French fries flow. Hopefully that's clear there. All right. Kedar says, I'm using database update to update multiple opportunities. I'm using database update to update multiple opportunities. One opportunity has field custom validations exception. So it's possible that other opportunities will save data partially, or it will be saved completely. So if you do a database.save and you provide the value of false for the second parameter, this is going to do what is called a partial DML. If you do just update and the list of records, then that's going to do a full commit. There's an old site that I don't maintain much anymore. All my blogging is usually on LinkedIn. But there is a website that I used to maintain that has a very good explanation, or very good answer of that question. If I type this correctly, type loan. Okay. Take a look at this particular link. It will help you understand that a little bit better. What tool to choose to be able to answer that? I am using the database. I answer that. Just to clarify, every process in which we update a field would invoke triggers. Absolutely, yes. Kosutan, absolutely. That is correct. What is the best approach to cover flows by unit testing? Winter 23, I believe, now has a feature to do testing of flows. But before that, or without using that, remember that a French fries or a parrot flow, all it does is basically they act when you DML a record similarly to the way you do a trigger. So if you DML a record in a test, your triggers will run, your flows, the French fries and the parrots will run, and then you can check to see that actually do what they're expected to do. And that's what I would do. The unit testing is not required. You don't have to have the 75% code coverage for flows, but I understand how important flows are. Sorry, how important unit tests are. So you can just do a DML, and your French fries and your parrot flows will be executed. All right, I do not see any more questions. So I think we'll call this a day. Thank you so much for attending this webinar. Hopefully, it was of relevance and importance, and you got everything you wanted out of that. Do drop me a note. Follow me on LinkedIn, El Toro IT. Drop me a note. Ask me a question. I'll be very happy to point you on the right direction. It was very nice seeing you, and my prayers are with Ukraine on this very very difficult time, and keep being brave, Ukraine. Thank you so much, and everybody else, please keep in peace. It was nice working with you guys today. Thank you.
Thank you, Andres.
Thanks, Teresa.
Bye, everyone.